É, QRM Office 5521, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We will have a conversation quite simple, quite clear. If I'm doing the installation of a system, for instance, and you do an interference, when I request to have a driver, and maybe I will have a duplicity of drivers, and sometimes these will appear. But this is not the target, because this is a consequence of things that we observe that leads since 2014. Before we had Mr. Donald Trump, before we had the Secretary Mike Pompeo and the Joe Biden on present time, we had a complaint about one very specific system that got combined with others, and was a system full of problems, full of distortions, with things that lead our perception and sense to top-down scams, but scams that had gone in a way that kind of was contradicted with the regular and standard patterns of law and order. And we will observe, and for sure we can confirm that the disorder puts all equal in the same way the corruption, and the similarity is one target that we must at the very first moment try to understand. The second thing that we will observe is that on economies and the econometric search model and things like this, we have two patterns as scale to understand things in a macro perception, and this give us and give ourselves the design of economic models as orthodox and heterodox. The orthodox, we have the perfect analysis by the comparative measurement between two curves that will lead to the investment saving curve and the liquidity money curve. It's the same thing in different moments. We'll present the reality based on circumstance, but indeed it's the same thing. And we will observe that this bring ourselves to the microeconomy and supply and demand, and for sure with the flow as circling money, which is the wealthy cycle at microeconomy, is stored in a unique thing, bring ourselves to the wealth of nation. The transparency to present the accountability shouldn't be creativity, shouldn't be made by creativity. And during this period we complained things pointed to this. And then we had the conversation in a very, very first moment with, for sure, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the CIA, about how the economy will kind of be a battlefield, and the struggle will, in the way we have, be there. And of course that this must goes with not control or not proper control, and then we could evidence and prove that the systematical failure is a consequence of the internal failure as control with tolerance with things, but the internal control is a consequence of hiring process, which lead ourselves one more time to the top-down scam. And the internal failure as a consequence of hiring process had a deeper level as the illicit advantage against the statement of my company, or lifting small piece of my treasury by contracts, or doing this as a unique thing, and we are talking about the overpayments And this kind of thing as illicit procedure, diverting money from a company, we will use the budget. But with not proper control, the budget is a new piece at my financial control, and in a very specific moment we can launch and have a new company. But it's a company made by failures of my environment based on tolerance with associative segment as interest, not the advantage by the continuity of this. This model was presented in the same way on our investment saving curve. And to have the continuity of this, you must consider have the illusion about facts and circumstances. And when or do the migration of modified data as something that came after you create this possibility. And this kind of thing is the basic idea as heterodox thing. The heterodox thing as model and mental model and economy will bring and have things with a phenomenon I would say named heteroscedasticity, which is the multivariance of essential notations at your identity, and the multivariance of essential notations at your identity indeed is a collinear group having a unique stimulus to have the variance, and the marginalism of this we indeed will put them all as a unique thing, and we are talking about the homoscedasty, kind of you did a regression by yourself, considering that everybody would like to take advantage of all things, bring everybody to the corruption as the collinear field, and the variance by stimulus is named green. Simple to understand economy. And this mental model, if had the motivation by drug use, of course that is a disease. It's a mental disease, a mental illness. And then when we have the complaint against these or all these since 2014, we observe that we have a lot of groups combined by this kind of failure. And indeed we are talking about this station, which is the briefcase in east, west, and center, the connection by segments associated in the interconnection by the interaction of peers associated in each one of those scans, having the control as a unique thing, considering that the corruption is always a crime. The corruption on west will be combined with the corruption on east, that have this interaction forming a unique thing as pandemic event. But it's a pandemic event based on the minority of those groups considering the not value as pounding a simple number. But sometimes they have the pound as value and put this as a density with which is the hierarchy of these kind of things. And this hierarchical value based on the density of each one of those variables that are the minority sets the idea as oppression and suppression. And then you will violate basic rights and guarantees considering that your interests as purpose, and sometimes the will to have the continuity and sustain are exposed, highlighted, evidenced, segmented, depurated, divided, sliced, and diced criminal system in something that you can sustain anymore. But you consider that you must be on it to protect the gains you had that will be seized as a criminal result. And the criminal result on your account, based on your bank, declaration, put yourself as criminal, crossed with signatures of public department on the budget and contracts on your company. We are talking about a coalition, and this coalition with trending for criminal or illicit advantage is a trending as criminal purpose with motivation to obtain and keep the continuity of criminal scam from regular areas, because this allows the criminals to be hidden inside the institution and by nepotism setting a physiological level with the interest as new incomes as variables at these sets and brings our sense to the perception of Ponzi scams. And this will impact the fiduciary element at the bank that must play this game and have the illusion about facts, about circumstances, and then you have the fusification between debits and credit. And this kind of fusification only is possible by a cryptocurrency as level of information, registry, and operation. And the clandestine movement of money resource go always by an interface or gateway with a physiological circuit on it. And by fractal behavior in Fibonacci, when you did the violation of my request at the internet as digital space, which a request made creates a circuit, you can understand that you are always doing this like this. You kind of create or do everything until you found a failure inside the regular area, then you put something on it to have the stochastic and continuous behavior as marginalism with a root cause as failure, and then you have a failure segment, a failure structure, a failure system, a failure conjuncture, a failure pandemic event with you all inside. By the decisions from the top-down corruption scam, your scam is failed. And when we must have in mind one last thing, that is, for instance, this scam maybe has a period that is very curious, which is if you have a machine like this, a notebook or your personal computer, and presented a problem, and you probably have this and to the area like an office or a store that will try to fix this, but instead of fix this, you will install instruments and gadgets at your system to permit the association and the creation of interconnection levels and fields by the time. And this is something new that we never had before in the way we are having. This is the first judgment about this, inside the first judgment by a machine in the history of mankind, considering the observation as cretinismus brasilis as the orientation to have the continuity of criminal scams by the misusage of instruments of control inside regular areas that bring ourselves to the designations and to the chairs on present time by nepotism, and in the moment before, as previous moment, by the corruption. And who had the designation of the corrupted variable that is turned into a corruptor that will entice other and do the harassment against anyone that do not get along with this? Can be a variable, a company, a system, or whatever, or even a macro organization. And in the same way, we will observe that, for instance, if you go to the beach and you have a lot of beaches, I would say, or a lot of girls beside you, and with kind of a behavior to have or set the perception that you are a sexual offender, and then you will do a harassment. If you, for instance, ask what time is it, but you do not consider the harassment as something against a legitimate effort since 1999 or at least 2009 or at least since 2014, considering all warnings made since from this time, and your aggression until this time isn't a harassment. You know, this is the kind of mental model that bring ourselves to your disease. By the drug use and dependence, there will be no enough resource to sustain your addiction, right?
And we will finish our conversation here. For sure, you can have that the deep web in deep sheet
Is kind of an advantage of failures at the structure as communication. By the need as expertise to have this failure, you probably have the lack of skills as an accomplishment to continue the scam from the top interconnected. And this bubble connected indeed is the top level of transnational organized crime operating by coalition and protect from the public budgets with chairs and the top. And did we have in any moment the mention about the lifelong chairs, which is that chairs that kind of in America is a judge or something like this, since have the good behavior. Did we have any destitution in America? Because I think that we must have in the same way in Brazil in other areas to, keep the factorization of the system of justice around the globe that is protecting the criminal scam and the pandemic evil. And all things complain. Have a nice night and weekend.